What if I told you that some of the most nutritious, hearty, and delicious vegetables in history have completely vanished from our dinner plates? Colonial farmers, those resourceful pioneers who carved civilization out of wilderness, grew an incredible array of vegetables that most modern Americans have never even heard of. These weren't just random plants they stumbled upon. These were carefully cultivated superfoods that helped build a nation. While we're busy debating whether kale or quinoa deserve superfood status, our ancestors were growing vegetables that could probably put both to shame. These forgotten crops didn't just feed families through harsh winters and unpredictable seasons, they thrived in conditions that would make today's pampered produce throw in the towel. The story of how we lost these remarkable vegetables might surprise you. It wasn't gradual neglect or natural selection that made them disappear. Instead, it was the rise of industrial agriculture, the demand for uniform appearance, and our modern obsession with convenience that pushed these nutritional powerhouses into obscurity. But here's what's fascinating. Many of these colonial vegetables were actually superior to what we eat today. They were more nutritious, more resilient, and often more flavorful than their modern counterparts. Some could survive frosts that would kill contemporary crops, while others could grow in poor soil where today's vegetables would struggle to sprout. Let's dig into 13 of these forgotten treasures and discover what we've been missing. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll probably want to start your own colonial garden. First up is skirret, and this might be the most criminally underrated vegetable in history. Colonial farmers brought skirret seeds from Europe because they knew something we've forgotten. This unassuming root vegetable was pure gold in the kitchen. Skirret looks somewhat like a bundle of white carrots, but that's where the similarity ends. These sweet, tender roots were so prized that European nobility demanded them in their palace gardens. When colonial settlers packed their precious cargo space with seeds for the New World, skirret made the cut alongside essentials like wheat and beans. What made skirret special wasn't just its honey-like sweetness, though that certainly helped during long winters when sugar was scarce. This remarkable plant was essentially a perennial vegetable that kept producing year after year with minimal care. Once established, a skirret patch would multiply underground, creating a hidden treasure trove of food that required almost no maintenance. Colonial cooks used every part of the plant. The roots could be boiled, roasted, or even candied for special occasions. The young shoots were eaten like asparagus in spring, and the leaves added a subtle sweetness to soups and stews. It was like having a 3-in-1 vegetable that never stopped giving. Modern nutritional analysis suggests skirret was packed with complex carbohydrates and natural sugars that provided sustained energy, exactly what hardworking colonial families needed. Yet somehow this incredible plant has virtually disappeared from American gardens, replaced by vegetables that require far more work and provide far less nutrition. While we struggle to keep modern spinach alive through temperature fluctuations and pest problems, colonial farmers had a secret weapon called Good King Henry. This leafy green was so reliable and nutritious that it earned a royal name, though nobody's quite sure why. Good King Henry wasn't just hardy, it was practically indestructible. Colonial gardeners could plant it once and harvest from the same patch for years. The plant would emerge early in spring when fresh greens were desperately needed, continue producing through summer heat that would wilt modern spinach, and keep going until hard frost finally knocked it back. What's remarkable about Good King Henry is how it seemed designed for colonial life. The young leaves could be eaten raw in salads or cooked like spinach. The flower buds, when they appeared, tasted remarkably similar to broccoli. Even the young shoots could be prepared like asparagus. It was essentially a vegetable that changed its personality throughout the growing season. Nutritionally, Good King Henry was a powerhouse. Recent analysis of preserved specimens shows it contained more iron than modern spinach, higher levels of vitamin C, and significant amounts of protein. Unusual for a leafy green, colonial families dealing with limited food variety during winter months relied on preserved Good King Henry to prevent nutritional deficiencies. The plant also had medicinal uses that colonial housewives valued highly. The leaves were used to treat wounds and skin irritations, while tea made from the roots served as a gentle digestive aid. In communities where the nearest doctor might be days away, having a medicinal food growing in your garden was invaluable. Before we dive into our next forgotten vegetable, I need to ask you something. If you're fascinated by these glimpses into colonial American life, the ingenious ways our ancestors survived and thrived with resources we've completely forgotten about, then you're going to love what's coming on this channel. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because we've got so much more to uncover about the remarkable ingenuity of America's early settlers. Now let's get back to our forgotten vegetables because our next one might just blow your mind. Imagine a vegetable so enthusiastic about growing that it would spread throughout your garden without any help from you. That was Alexander's, a plant that colonial farmers both loved and occasionally cursed for its ambitious growing habits. Alexander's arrived in colonial America with European settlers who knew its value from the old country. Unlike the finicky celery we know today, Alexander's was a robust plant that could handle whatever weather threw at it. It grew wild along coastlines and in disturbed soil, but it also responded beautifully to cultivation. Every single part of Alexander's was edible, which made it incredibly valuable for colonial families trying to maximize their food production. The young stems could be eaten raw or cooked like celery, but with a more complex flavor that combined hints of parsley and fennel. The leaves added a bright, fresh taste to soups and stews. The flowers were edible and made beautiful garnishes for special meals. Even the seeds could be ground and used as a pepper substitute. What made Alexander's particularly valuable was its timing. The plant would emerge early in spring when colonial families were desperate for fresh food after months of preserved vegetables and salted meat. Those first tender shoots provided crucial vitamins and minerals that helped prevent scurvy and other nutritional diseases. The plant's aggressive growing habit, which might seem like a problem to modern gardeners, was actually a blessing for colonial farmers. In a time when every calorie mattered and crop failures could mean starvation, having a vegetable that practically grew itself was a gift from nature. While modern spinach bolts and turns bitter at the first sign of summer heat, colonial farmers had orach, a leafy green that actually thrived in hot weather. This remarkable plant solved one of the biggest challenges colonial gardeners faced: how to have fresh greens during the scorching summer months. Orach came in several varieties, with leaves ranging from green to deep red to almost purple. Colonial seed catalogs from the 1700s list multiple types, suggesting that farmers were actively selecting and breeding different varieties for specific uses. The red varieties were particularly prized not just for their striking appearance, but because they retained their color when cooked, adding visual appeal to otherwise monotonous meals. The flavor of orach was milder and less bitter than modern spinach, even when the plants were stressed by heat or drought. Colonial cooks discovered that orach leaves could be used raw in salads when young, or cooked like spinach when mature. The plant would continue producing tender leaves throughout the summer, providing a steady supply of fresh greens when other leafy vegetables had long since given up. Nutritionally, orach was impressive. Analysis of historical varieties shows it contains significant amounts of vitamins A and C, along with minerals like iron and calcium. For colonial families whose diets were often heavy on preserved meats and grains, orach provided essential nutrients that helped maintain health during the challenging summer months. The plant was also remarkably drought tolerant, which was crucial for colonial farmers who couldn't rely on irrigation systems. Orach could survive on natural rainfall alone, even during dry spells that would kill more demanding vegetables. Just when colonial families thought they'd have to survive on stored vegetables until spring, corn salad would appear like a miracle in their gardens. This small, unassuming plant had the remarkable ability to grow during winter months when everything else was dormant. Despite its name, corn salad has nothing to do with corn. The name comes from its habit of growing wild in grain fields after harvest. Colonial farmers quickly recognized its value and began cultivating it deliberately, creating some of the first winter salad gardens in American history. What made corn salad extraordinary was its cold tolerance. While other greens would be killed by the first frost, corn salad would keep growing, providing fresh leaves even when snow covered the ground. Colonial gardeners learned to plant it in late summer, and the small rosettes of leaves would continue developing through fall and winter, ready to harvest whenever fresh greens were needed. The flavor was mild and nutty, with none of the bitterness that often develops in cold weather greens. Colonial cooks used corn salad raw in winter salads, a luxury that seems impossible given the season. The leaves could also be cooked, though they were so tender that they required only brief heating. Nutritionally, corn salad was a winter lifesaver. It provided vitamin C and other nutrients at a time when scurvy and other deficiency diseases were common threats. Having access to fresh greens during winter months gave colonial families a significant health advantage over those who relied entirely on preserved foods. Patient stock earned its name honestly. This was a vegetable that would wait patiently in the garden until you were ready to harvest it. For colonial farmers dealing with unpredictable schedules and competing demands, having a vegetable that didn't require precise timing was invaluable. This large-leafed plant was essentially a perennial spinach that would emerge early each spring and continue producing throughout the growing season. Unlike annual vegetables that had to be replanted each year, patient stock would return reliably, often growing larger and more productive with each passing season. The leaves of patient stock were substantial, much larger than modern spinach leaves, and had a tangy, slightly sour flavor that colonial cooks learned to appreciate. Young leaves could be eaten raw, while older leaves were typically cooked to mellow their stronger flavor. The plant's ability to produce tender young leaves continuously throughout the season meant that colonial families always had access to fresh greens. What made patient stock particularly valuable was its nutritional profile. The leaves were rich in vitamins A and C, along with significant amounts of iron and other minerals. For colonial families whose diets were often deficient in fresh vegetables, patient stock provided essential nutrients that helped maintain health throughout the year. The plant also had medicinal uses that colonial herbalists valued. The roots were used to treat various ailments, while the leaves were applied to wounds and skin conditions. Having a food that also served as medicine was typical of the multi-purpose plants that colonial farmers preferred. Along the Atlantic coast, colonial settlers discovered a remarkable vegetable growing wild in the sandy soil near the ocean. Sea kale was unlike anything they'd known in Europe, a hardy plant that thrived in salty conditions where other vegetables would struggle to survive. Sea kale produced thick, fleshy leaves and stems that had a unique flavor, combining elements of cabbage and asparagus. Colonial coastal communities quickly learned to harvest and cultivate this unusual plant, which provided fresh vegetables in an environment where traditional gardening was challenging. The plant's tolerance for salt spray and sandy soil made it perfect for coastal settlements where fresh water was often scarce and soil quality was poor. Sea kale could grow in conditions that would kill most other vegetables, providing coastal colonial families with a reliable source of fresh food. Preparation methods varied, but colonial cooks typically blanched the young shoots by covering them with sand or cloth, which made them more tender and milder in flavor. The blanched shoots were considered a delicacy, often served at special occasions when available. Nutritionally, sea kale was rich in vitamin C and other nutrients that were particularly important for coastal communities whose diets were often heavy on preserved fish and limited fresh produce. The plant's high vitamin C content helped prevent scurvy, a serious concern for people whose diets lacked fresh fruits and vegetables. What if I told you that one of the most nutritious vegetables colonial farmers grew is probably considered a weed in your backyard today? Lamb's quarters was so common and valuable that colonial families relied on it as a dietary staple. Yet modern gardeners typically pull it up and throw it away. Lamb's quarters had the remarkable ability to grow almost anywhere, in gardens, along roadsides, in disturbed soil, and even in the cracks between stones. This adaptability made it incredibly valuable for colonial families who couldn't always count on their carefully tended gardens to produce enough food. The young leaves of lamb's quarters were tender and mild, perfect for raw salads or quick cooking. As the plants matured, the leaves became more substantial and were typically cooked like spinach. But the real treasure was the seeds, tiny, nutritious grains that could be ground into flour or cooked like quinoa. Modern nutritional analysis reveals just how valuable lamb's quarters was. The leaves contain more protein than spinach, more calcium than milk, pound for pound, and significant amounts of vitamins A and C. The seeds are complete proteins containing all essential amino acids, something that was crucial for colonial families whose protein sources were often limited. Colonial families would harvest lamb's quarters throughout the growing season, using the young leaves fresh and drying the mature leaves and seeds for winter use. A single plant could provide both fresh vegetables and storable grains, making it one of the most efficient food sources available. Long before we knew about omega-3 fatty acids and antioxidants, colonial farmers were growing purslane, a succulent vegetable that modern science has revealed to be one of the most nutritious plants on Earth. This low-growing, spreading plant was a common sight in colonial gardens, valued for its unique texture and tangy flavor. Purslane's thick, fleshy leaves and stems had a crisp, refreshing texture that was unlike any other vegetable in the colonial garden. The flavor was mildly tart, with a lemony quality that made it perfect for salads or as a cooked vegetable. Colonial cooks used purslane both raw and cooked, often adding it to soups and stews where its mucilaginous properties helped thicken the broth. What colonial farmers didn't know, but modern science has revealed, is that purslane contains more omega-3 fatty acids than any other leafy green vegetable. It's also loaded with vitamins A, C, and E, along with significant amounts of magnesium, calcium, and potassium. In terms of nutrition per square foot of garden space, purslane was probably one of the most efficient crops colonial farmers could grow. The plant was also remarkably drought-tolerant, storing water in its thick leaves and stems. This made it valuable during dry spells when other vegetables might struggle. Purslane could continue producing tender, edible growth even when rainfall was scarce. Colonial families often pickled purslane for winter use, creating a tangy condiment that added flavor and nutrition to preserved foods. The pickled stems and leaves provided vitamin C during winter months when fresh vegetables were unavailable. While modern arugula is often treated as a gourmet specialty, colonial farmers grew rocket, as they called it, as a practical, everyday vegetable. This peppery green was valued not just for its distinctive flavor, but for its ability to grow quickly and reliably in cool weather. Colonial rocket was typically more robust and flavorful than modern arugula varieties. The leaves had a sharp, peppery bite that added excitement to otherwise bland colonial meals. A little rocket could transform a simple salad of mild greens into something memorable and flavorful. The plant's quick growth made it perfect for succession planting. Colonial gardeners could sow new crops every few weeks throughout the cool seasons, ensuring a continuous supply of fresh, young leaves. Rocket could be ready to harvest in as little as 3 weeks from planting, making it one of the fastest vegetables in the colonial garden. Nutritionally, rocket was a powerhouse. The leaves contained significant amounts of vitamins A, C, and K, along with folate and calcium. The peppery compounds that gave rocket its distinctive flavor also had antimicrobial properties, which may have helped colonial families avoid foodborne illnesses. Colonial seed catalogs from the 1700s list several varieties of rocket, suggesting that farmers were actively selecting for different characteristics. Some varieties were milder and better for raw eating, while others were more pungent and preferred for cooking. Don't let the name fool you. Scorzonera might sound like a medieval curse, but this black-skinned root vegetable was actually one of the most prized crops in colonial gardens. The unfortunate name comes from the Italian word for black snake, referring to the root's dark exterior, but inside lay a treasure that colonial cooks valued highly. Scorzonera roots looked intimidating, long, thin, and covered in black skin that had to be carefully peeled away. But underneath that unpromising exterior was white flesh with a delicate flavor that combined elements of artichoke, asparagus, and oyster. Colonial cooks considered it a delicacy, often saving it for special occasions. What made Scorzonera particularly valuable was its storage ability. Harvested in fall, the roots could be stored in cool cellars through the entire winter, providing fresh vegetables when nothing else was available. Unlike many root vegetables that would shrivel or sprout during long storage, Scorzonera remained firm and flavorful for months. The plant was also remarkably easy to grow. Once established, Scorzonera required minimal care and could tolerate poor soil conditions that would challenge other root crops. Colonial farmers appreciated vegetables that didn't demand constant attention, and Scorzonera fit that requirement perfectly. Preparation required some skill. The black skin had to be peeled carefully to avoid staining hands and cutting boards. Colonial cooks learned to work with Scorzonera immediately after peeling, as the white flesh would darken when exposed to air. But the effort was worth it, as the cooked roots had a unique, sophisticated flavor that elevated simple colonial meals. Modern nutritional analysis shows that Scorzonera was rich in inulin, a prebiotic fiber that supports digestive health. It also contains significant amounts of potassium, vitamin C, and various B vitamins. For colonial families whose winter diets were often monotonous and nutritionally limited, Scorzonera provided both variety and essential nutrients. Perhaps no colonial vegetable had a more intriguing reputation than salsify, known as the vegetable oyster, for its remarkable ability to mimic the taste of seafood. For inland colonial families who rarely had access to fresh oysters, salsify provided a way to enjoy that distinctive briny flavor without traveling to the coast. Salsify roots were long and thin, similar to parsnips, but with a more delicate appearance. The real magic happened when they were cooked. The roots developed a creamy texture and a flavor so similar to oysters that even experienced cooks could be fooled. Colonial recipe books contain numerous instructions for preparing mock oyster dishes using salsify. The plant was particularly valuable during Lent and other religious observances when meat and fish were restricted. Salsify allowed colonial families to create satisfying, flavorful meals that felt indulgent while still adhering to dietary restrictions. Mock oyster stews and fritters became popular dishes that showcased salsify's unique properties. Growing salsify required patience. The roots needed a full growing season to develop their best flavor and texture. But colonial farmers found the wait worthwhile, as a successful salsify crop could provide both fresh eating and winter storage. The roots could be left in the ground until needed, actually improving in flavor after exposure to frost. Nutritionally, salsify provided complex carbohydrates, fiber, and various minerals. The roots were particularly rich in potassium and contained compounds that supported liver function, something that colonial herbalists recognized even without understanding the underlying science. Our final forgotten vegetable is perhaps the most dramatic. Cardoon, a plant that looks like a giant artichoke but produces edible stems instead of flower buds. Colonial gardeners who grew cardoon were making a serious commitment, as this impressive plant could reach 6 feet tall and required special preparation techniques. Cardoon stems needed to be blanched while growing. Colonial gardeners would wrap the stems in cloth or bury them in soil to keep them pale and tender. This labor-intensive process was worth the effort, as properly blanched cardoon stems had a delicate artichoke-like flavor that was considered a true delicacy. The plant's impressive size made it a striking addition to colonial gardens, but it also served practical purposes. Cardoon's large leaves could be used as natural umbrellas or temporary shelter, while the dried stems made excellent kindling for fires. Even the flowers were useful. They contained natural enzymes that could be used to curdle milk for cheesemaking. Preparation of cardoon required skill and patience. The stems had to be carefully cleaned to remove tough fibers, then cooked slowly to achieve the proper tender texture. Colonial cooks developed various techniques for preparing cardoon, from simple boiling to elaborate gratins that showcased the vegetable's unique flavor. Despite its impressive appearance and delicious taste, cardoon gradually disappeared from American gardens. The labor-intensive growing and preparation methods didn't fit well with increasingly busy lifestyles, and simpler vegetables took its place. These colonial vegetables largely disappeared due to industrial agriculture and the demand for uniformity. The shift to large-scale farming favored crops that could be mass-produced, shipped far, and stored long, e.g. skirret's irregular roots didn't fit. Consumers expected perfect, uniform produce, leading to the abandonment of varieties with unusual colors. The loss of local seed saving also caused genetically diverse varieties to vanish. Finally, the knowledge of specific, traditional preparation was lost, as families embraced convenience foods. Bringing these vegetables back offers solutions to modern problems, starting with climate resilience. Many, like drought-tolerant purslane and cold-hardy corn salad, can handle environmental stress. They offer superior nutrition. Lamb's quarters has more protein than spinach, and purslane is a rare plant source of omega-3s. Their unique flavor profiles, imagine salsify oysters, could revolutionize cooking. And from a sustainability view, perennial vegetables like Good King Henry improve soil health, requiring fewer inputs than modern crops. These 13 forgotten vegetables represent more than just historical curiosities. They're a testament to the ingenuity and wisdom of colonial farmers who selected and preserved varieties that could thrive in challenging conditions while providing superior nutrition and flavor. We've traded this incredible diversity for the convenience of modern agriculture, but we don't have to accept that trade-off permanently. By rediscovering these remarkable vegetables, we can reconnect with our agricultural heritage while building more resilient and nutritious food systems for the future. The next time you're planning your garden or shopping for seeds, consider adding one of these forgotten treasures to your list. You might discover that the vegetables our ancestors grew were actually superior to what we're eating today. And in a world facing climate change, environmental degradation, and nutritional challenges, perhaps it's time to look backward to move forward. These colonial farmers knew something we've forgotten, that the best vegetables aren't always the prettiest or most convenient ones. Sometimes the most valuable crops are the ones that can survive whatever nature throws at them while providing the nutrition and flavor that make meals memorable. The seeds of these forgotten vegetables are still out there, waiting for gardeners willing to give them another chance. The question is, are you ready to discover what we've been missing?